Nature has shaped my practice of Buddhism and photography. In turn, these practices have been the vehicles for realizing our profound connection to nature. I would like to share some thoughts and images that resulted from these relations. My most recent photographic project is about the Great Northern Forest. The Vermont woods are my home. I hike with the camera daily along the logging roads and deer runs in this second-growth forest. My movement is kinhin, walking meditation. I try to allow my mind to be wide and accepting until it distills into two dimensions. As I photograph, I work to keep the pictures straightforward, specific, and unromantic, just recorded moments from the lives of the trees. Zen encourages doubt and questioning. Art does the same. Ignorance and uncertainty are doors that open to new knowledge. Asking myself the koan, "What is this?" often gives me pause that may allow new feelings and visual ideas to present themselves. Our core sense of beauty arises from our deep connection to the natural world. We humans are of the forest, and our urbanity rests upon them. Trees produce oxygen, paper, and building materials. They moderate the climate and are home to animals. But these forested landscapes are not unchanging. Their existence is provisional, for all are managed working timberlands under private, state, and national control. Most of the productive forest in Vermont was once farmland, and all of it has been logged repeatedly. With the decline of Vermont's hill farms during the late 19th century, the forest reasserted its presence on the land. In 1870, forest covered about a quarter of the state. Today, more than 3/4 is woodland. This remarkable turnaround has taken place on what is overwhelmingly private land. These forests are resilient, with the energy of life. We share this dynamic force. Photography, my life, and the life of the forest are interdependent. All existence is interdependent, boundless, and empty of a separate self. Perhaps on the physical level, this is most evident. Photosynthesis in plants is responsible for most of the oxygen in the air upon which we and our fellow land creatures depend. In turn, we exhale carbon dioxide, which plants need for photosynthesis and building structure. These are major exchanges. One human being provides enough carbon dioxide for about 13 average trees, and about 3 trees provide enough oxygen for one person. Here's my wonderful chocolate lab who died during this project. She loved this forest and its putrid, tasty carcasses. Native peoples of the Americas speak of a corpse physically feeding the earth. In a wider sense, they also link the fertility of death to change that enables the flow of life. Buddhism also has a strong sense of interconnections between all parts of existence. From such realizations came a series of religious rites to ensure a proper relationship to the earth, our true teacher. The implicit meaning of such rituals is that what we do affects the planet. We are enmeshed in this world. Our actions have consequences, as we see today with our environmental crisis. All things in existence share the fundamental bond of being. We are equal in presence. This simple fact has been significant to my understanding, so I was pleased to discover that the Maya in Mexico had precisely articulated this parity. The Maya extended personhood to not just people, but to a wide variety of non-human entities. These beings did not need to be alive or sentient, nor did they need to be connected to a human. Anthropologist Sarah Jackson has said, "This is a profoundly democratizing way of understanding the world. Humans are not more important persons. We are just one of many kinds of persons who inhabit this world. Entities were able to be persons while also being something else. We are challenged to discard the person-non-person binary that constitutes our basic ontological outlook. The porousness of boundaries that we have seen in the Maya world points towards the possibility of living with a certain uncategorizability of the world. End quote. My feel for this existential equivalence has grown from looking at many photographs and realizing that they are based on an equality of visual elements. All parts are important and are in relationship to all other parts. The Buddhist perspective engenders a similar respect for all things and their interdependence. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "The Buddha looked up at a pipala leaf imprinted against the blue sky. Looking deeply at the leaf, he saw clearly the presence of the sun and stars. Without the sun, without light and warmth, the leaf could not exist. He also saw in the leaf the presence of clouds. Without clouds, there could be no rain, and without rain, the leaf could not be. He saw the earth, time, space, and mind all were present in the leaf. In fact, at that very moment, the entire universe existed in that leaf. The leaf and his body were one. Neither possessed a separate, permanent self. Neither could exist independently from the rest of the universe. Seeing the interdependent nature of all phenomenon, Siddhartha saw the empty nature of all phenomena, that all things are empty of a separate, isolated self. He realized the key to liberation lay in these two principles of interdependence and non-self." End quote. Here's a brief modern American version of the same idea from conservationist John Muir. "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe." End quote. For me, this photograph is a visual koan. It is one birch and one rock. With meditative awareness, we often seek to open our perspective as wide as possible. With my own work and in teaching photography, I encourage this approach. Not zooming in, but taking the widest view that still works. And I mean that optically, conceptually, and in terms of awareness. I have taken great joy in being with friends in the wilderness, but I generally prefer to be alone. This allows a different relationship with the natural environment. More mysterious, vivid, frightening, nurturing, humbling, spiritual, mythological, interconnected, primeval. While these descriptors may sound romantic and exotified, such feelings for me can be both intense and down to earth. Being on my own frees my mind to extend into the vastness of the space and exist in time not measured by a human clock. I feel small but not diminished. The quietness engenders an unmitigated, peaceful connection to nature. One of the more important realizations about being alone was knowing that I wasn't alone, maybe separated from other people, yet surrounded by an intimate and infinite world. Of course, as anyone who has meditated knows, such sublime harmony can be quickly blocked when one's own mind is crowded with thoughts. Sometimes, even while walking alone, I have felt as though an annoying, talkative person was by my side. I have been bad company for myself and the trees. The results of my cholesterol test were good, and I decided to celebrate. I bought several pounds of pork sausage, link and patty. I arrived home quite late that February night and saw that our long driveway was too icy to drive up. I parked below and began the quarter-mile walk up the steep road through the dark forest. The sausage was in my coat pockets. A third of the way along, I heard the coyotes yelping. They were close. Just how good is their sense of smell? I gripped the packages of sausage tight, and not because I was going to hold on to it at all cost. I wanted to be ready to throw it. I would sacrifice the lynx first. The wild cries of the coyotes continued loud and very near. I thought I saw them just behind the trees at the edge of the driveway. At least the snow cover would reveal them just before an attack. I kept hustling clumsily on the ice and finally made it to the house with the sausage, Link and Patty. From writer John Elder, in the Vermont woods, we are nettled, led on by everything we don't yet see and can't clearly hear. Silence and absence teach us to pay attention. They throw us upon our own resources. Vermonters are familiar with this process of reduction and focus. The cold months settle into our state as a gradual clarification. Winter holds up objects in high relief. It invites us to be still and cool, to let one curve, one color truly enter the mind. Winter is just one of the erasures through which Vermont has come into its own. End quote. Buddhism speaks of a shared big mind of awareness that is extended throughout existence. This picture is from Karma Choling, the Tibetan center in eastern Vermont. The mechanism is unclear, but trees remember, or at least react, to what happens to them in their lives. For instance, larches that have suffered from an infestation of caterpillars will change the shape of their leaves the next year to a shorter and stouter form that resists attack. In subsequent years, they will return to a leaf shape better for photosynthesis. Some trees warn others about an injurious caterpillar attack by releasing a gas. Their neighbors arm their leaves with a toxin to ward off the pests. Another example, trees subjected to wind grow thicker and sturdier. The tree in the open is considerably stronger than its relative in dense forest. Deciduous trees drop their leaves or grow new ones based on the changing light, but local weather also affects their timing. The necessary technical aspects of photography were not hard to learn. More difficult to understand and apply were the right mental and artistic focus. The practice of photography requires a rigorous but relaxed attention to the scene in front of you. Ideally, this concentration is preceded by a more unusual state of mind, a general expansive awareness that takes in the whole. Such broad awareness allows us to see and consider the unexpected and to extend our vision. In both attention and awareness, one strives to let go of, not repress, conceptual thinking, and in a process similar to Zazen, to just see. For me, the conceptual philosophical context of making art is hopefully primed well before depressing the shutter. This approach includes what one knows about the subject and how that might be expressed visually. Such method presupposes some understanding of key questions, such as drama. Do you want to describe the exceptional or the quotidian? Politics. Is it present or implied in what you are showing? And philosophy. What is important in life? After a few years of concentrating on landscapes, my philosophical approach began to slowly shift. Initially, I had sought out unusual or spectacular scenes, majestic mountains, intense contrast of light and shadow, weird plant forms. I put a lot of effort into that pursuit. However, the results were not satisfying. I was producing dramatic views in a style that was familiar and predictable. I started to move toward the ordinary and to pay more attention to all that surrounded me in the landscape and society. Over the years, attentiveness to the commonplace and what might be learned from that became more developed, conscious, and fulfilling. The sense of intimacy in the images increased. Vermont's Champlain Valley has a grand topography, but I incline toward the quieter, anonymous places. In such ordinary circumstance, my tendency to see through memory becomes painfully obvious. But with this realization, sometimes the veil lifts and the familiar turns out to be new. Letting go of past ways of seeing can be difficult. In speaking of letting go, Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck once said that we don't really let go of anything, we just get sick of it. Repetitious thinking and imagery are tiresome. Paying equal attention to all that is around you is a solution. Photographic art has moved toward a wider embrace of the world from inception. It has done so with an attention that is specific, present, and democratic. Everything is worthy of consideration, and within the photographic frame, everything is significant. Fixed assumptions and ideals erode, leaving subtlety and doubt. Perhaps because of its slow pace, landscape photography encourages contemplative reflection. Contact with natural processes can give us a sense of our place in the world. The infinite manifests in the landscape. Self-involvement diminishes. A vital morality without prescription is in the balance. Although the so-called natural world is neither more real or true than is the human-made environment, it may give us a more space to consider our own nature. The human world is so intentional and manipulated that we easily become reactive and discursive. Some distance from society usually allows us to see and contemplate with more clarity. The forest offers an interconnected complexity and vastness that give us perspective and balance. Our psyche needs the forest, in the immediate sense of connecting with the sights and sounds of an unfolding walk, and in the abstract way we imagine into the deeply mythical space of the forest. The former sensations can be paradoxically relaxing and exciting, resulting in a calm but precise hunter's awareness. The latter, mythical archetypes, may be spiritually ascendant or physically terrifying, but all reveal ancient foundations of human experience. Trees give a proportion to our human life, even in the city. Like us, they are suspended vertically between heaven and earth. The trees are not there without the space around them. Likewise, the photograph is not there without the frame around it and the space around the frame. The components of the photograph are lost in their relation to one another and in relation to all they are not. One of the appeals of photography is that it unifies and puts everything into relation within the frame. The underlying reality of the photograph is the unity of the parts. Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "These trees are magnificent, but even more magnificent is the sublime and moving space between them." End quote. In the Poetics of Space, philosopher Gaston Bachelard writes that despite the physical facts, the space of the forest extends infinitely in our minds. This immensity is within us. We respond with a visceral poetry to the soaring, variable, and interdependent forms of trees. The complexity of the forest encourages a realization of process, of ourselves in the process, and of the direct quality of our experience in the present. Bachelard also considers time. Who knows the temporal dimensions of the forest? History is not enough. In the vast world of the non-I, The field is not the same as the forest. The forest is before, whereas for fields and meadows, my dreams and recollections accompany all the different phases of tilling and harvesting. When the dialectics of the I and the non-I grow more flexible, I feel that fields and meadows are with me, but forests reign in the past." End quote. Intervals of time are integral to photography. Conceptions of time, its passage, stasis, relationship to context and change, are critical to understanding art. I made a few sculptural works some years ago that emphasize the space and memory of the forest. This is a stainless steel forest line, a detail 200 feet by 1 foot. A roll of stainless steel was installed level, winding through tree trunks from 5 to 7 feet above the ground. An intensification of the space, I think. The glaciers of the past and the ice of the present have physically shaped the environment. This is a tree ice ring, 5 feet in diameter by 5 inches thick, about 500 pounds. This was made by gradually adding water with a little blue food coloring to a form, which was removed after the water froze. The grip of the ice onto the bark holds it in place. This idea originated with seeing the large chunks of ice that would be left clinging to riverbank trees after flooding, freezing, and the receding of the water. Ice columns, each 13 feet tall by 1 foot in diameter. Precast sections 1 foot in length were assembled to make the 3 columns. 4 ice ages covered the upper northern hemisphere with ice as thick as 1 mile. The last glacier retreated from what would become Vermont 10,000 years ago. I was concerned about liability issues with this sculpture since I knew it was going to fall at some point and that it was located near a dangerous bend of Vermont Route 23. But the landowner insisted on not posting this area. And there was an accident. A car ran off the road while the driver was appreciating the sculpture and hit a tree, the only tree in a very big field. Fortunately, the driver was not hurt. It was my wife. I'm happy she likes my work. Any romantic qualities in my photographs should be tempered by the whining of mosquitoes and mad circling of deer flies, because I was being bitten during most of the fair weather exposures. During the 10 years I worked on this book, the tick population in the local forest surged. While I explored the woods, a variety of ticks, some no doubt carrying Lyme disease, explored me. The root of romanticism is the accurate realization that we humans are not separate from the world. In the romantic moment, we discover a joy in shared existence. But our conceptual minds quickly follow to form an idea of that event that we can hang on to. This mental construct is abstracted and isolated from the original, free-flowing touch with reality. The concept is not the experience. This difference makes the mental formulation of romantic ideals and standards rather deadly. Analytical thinking often discourages a perspective of the whole. We tend to compare, and we do so through isolating subjects with thought. Contents are identified and separated from their context by thought. In artworks, subject and ground can be seen as one only without comparison and identification. Beauty is holistic, connected, and experienced without thought. Our existence is no different. We may be able to think we are on our own, but our reality is highly relational, contextual, and dependent upon all aspects of our environment. At the 1975 New Topographics exhibition in Rochester, New York, the featured photographers broke from the idealized, God is Here imagery of American landscape photography. This jump-started a rejection of romanticism and an embrace of the vernacular. Soon, a movement was created with photographers' insistent inclusion of the human presence, and it opened our eyes to what we were ignoring and what we, as a global society, were doing to our Earth. The low-key, ordinary aspect of the new topographics pictures was a valuable corrective to the nostalgic vision of blessed America's glorious, untrammeled natural beauty. That artistic change parallels the tempering of early purist forms of environmentalism into our contemporary acceptance of human society as part of the workings of our planet. The work of painter Bryce Marden has meant a lot to me. These photographs reference his etchings related to Chinese calligraphy and the poems of the Taoist Buddhist hermits like Han Shan and Du Fu. Only a few of my photographs include direct signs of human presence, but the underlying truth of the northern forest and of my images is that all we see has been shaped by human activities and agendas. In one regard, this forest is a socially constructed landscape, but hopefully my perspective allows one to take joy in the natural setting, even as one realizes both the past damage and the current threat of economic forces on the land. As photographer Robert Adams writes, Edward Thomas, a country poet, observed that people and trees are imperfect friends, citing the tragic nature of people and the silence of trees. End quote. Secular Buddhism is how I would describe my religious practice of the last few decades. My spirituality moved toward everyday experience, and my photography harmonized. The camera became an existential instrument. The act of using the camera could be reverent, being here, now, present. Photography and art making involve many aspects of Buddhist mindfulness, regardless of whether one knows the methods of meditation. Photographic practice requires a connected and peaceful attention to the world and one's head. Being open and alert is inherently exciting. Images could express the sacred in form and meaning. Theologically, I began to see the scientific investigations of modern physics as a verifiable system of philosophy, capable of addressing spiritual questions. I would like to turn briefly to an earlier series called Alchemical Reconnaissance. This is the first of 30 photographs, Mount Diablo, California. These photographs attempt to relate the investigations of landscape photography and high-energy physics. I wrote text to accompany each photograph. It was handwritten just below the image or placed to the side. The process involved in seeing these pictures and considering the text can be similar to contemplative meditation. For this photograph, the text reads, "Light may be described as either particle or wave. Its particle nature is shown by the discrete quanta of energy it imparts at an exact location. The wave properties of light are shown by interference and diffraction patterns produced as it passes through small openings. When the crest of one wave meets the trough of another wave, all light is canceled at that location. When the crest of one wave meets the crest of another wave, the light is amplified. Such an interference pattern attributable to wave phenomenon will paradoxically be registered bit by bit, or as a particle." End quote. Among other things, this points out some of the difficulties of language. The paradox is in the words and our minds, not in the behavior of light. The confusion of words and reality is a constant human problem. From the same series, this is Lake Michigan. The text reads, "The Doppler effect is the change in frequency of a wave when the wave emitter moves in relation to the wave receiver." Polish mathematician Johann Doppler theorized this effect in 1842. It was experimentally verified 3 years later by Dutch scientist Christoph Ballucht. He positioned a group of musicians with perfect pitch alongside a railroad track and had an open carload of trumpeters playing one note pass by. The listeners heard the predicted tonal change. End quote. Art and science need not be two. This photograph was made when I was in Wisconsin for my wedding. A great time, but I should say not for everyone. On our wedding night, that very romantic time, my wife looked me in the eyes and said, "I think I've made the biggest mistake of my life." But we've been married for 36 years now, and with much happiness. This is from Eagle Mountain, California. Eagle Mountain is a modern ghost town, an abandoned Kaiser Steel mining town in the Mojave Desert. This house has been partially disassembled. In addition, you can see how the strong sunlight has changed the colors of this living room photographic mural of a waterfall in the forest. Instead of reading my text about entropy, change, and the scientific definition of time, I'll read this short passage about time from Dogen's Genjo Koan. "Firewood becomes ash, and it does not become firewood again. Yet do not suppose that the ash is future and the firewood past. You should understand that firewood abides in the phenomenal expression of firewood, which fully includes past and future and is independent of past and future. Ash abides in the phenomenal expression of ash, which fully includes future and past. Just as firewood does not become firewood again after it is ash, you do not return to birth after death." End quote. Back to the Northern Forest Project, and here Lake Champlain. The Buddhist teacher Stephen Batchelor, who also works with photography, has written about the fact of constant change with relation to the difficulty of returning to a site expecting the same scene to exist. I went back to this place many times to work with this situation, but never found anything remotely like this combination of light and waves. After many years of living in Vermont, I still find this forest's seasonal changes startling. These dynamic transformations are integrated into time composite photo montages. Past, present, and future coexist in a time cycle incarnate. These photograph montages attempt to materialize that notion of the past and the future existing in the present moment, in the present form. Our fascination with photography is grounded in such accords. In the unity of time, the photograph presents a moment of the past right now. In the unity of space, the photograph places all of its contents onto the same surface and into relationship. And in the unity of time and space, the photograph shows that these elements are not separate. The time composites are embodiments of such change. They arise from the brutalist instinct of throwing things together, the Hadron Collider impulse. The landscapes of the time composites were carefully photographed from the exact same location at different times. Since these images are essentially presented as one view, they feel very close to being straight photographs to me. At first, I marked the camera's position with a stake using a plumb bob suspended from a tripod. A set of exact tripod measurements and ribbon guides placed in the landscape at the sides of the view would complete the initial set. This method worked, but it took at least an hour, sometimes two, to reset the tripod and camera precisely. Very frustrating. I now attach a camera mount to a tree or leave a tripod in place, weighted down with bricks, for a full year. I am happy to say that I have lost no tripods to theft. These time composites and all the other images in the book have not been digitally manipulated. Computer tools have been used to piece together the different images, but nothing else has been created or altered. This was the first time composite I made, the fruition of 20 years of thinking about these changes in the landscape. When I first came to Vermont, I started rephotographing the same location, but I couldn't figure out how to put them together. I must be a slow learner. I hope this current approach works. Both continuity and change are immediately evident. I told you that this rephotographing could be frustrating. Here it became so upsetting I actually had a heart attack while making the winter photograph shown at the top here. My ECG from the emergency room at the hospital runs across the center of the image in red. I would eventually accept some small changes in my positioning of the camera. After all, the tree branches change position over time and with the loads of snow and leaves. Finally, I would like to leave you with two quotes about the ethics of conservation. Aldo Leopold wrote, "We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." End quote. Lastly, another quote from Buddhist, deep ecologist, Vermonter Stephanie Kaza. "Forest as home, forest as resource, forest as landscape, forest as community, forest as wilderness. There is no one way to view the northern forest. Each person, town, corporate landholder, tree, moose, and salamander has a different perspective for and experience with the northern forest. In the struggle for biological and economic survival, some needs are incompatible. Some organisms and landscapes flourish while others perish. The ethical dilemmas of the northern forest arise out of the urgent and motivating desire to survive. Loggers, forest towns, native peoples, paper companies, and the forest itself all have this desire to survive in common. The conflicts of the northern forest are not unique to this biological region. Similar tensions rack the great conifer belt of the Pacific Northwest, the abundant rainforest of Amazonia, and the oak woodlands of California. They are driven by the overwhelming imbalance of the power of humans and human institutions over non-humans, that is, trees, deer, fish, watersheds. This crushing imbalance raises many moral and ethical questions." End quote. Thank you for listening and seeing.